good evening and welcome to Merit TV's Election Watch. My name is David Craig. Tonight, we're going to break down the two documents that may shape Canada's future more than any campaign speech, social media ad, or debate stage moment could ever. The first, the costed platforms, finally released by the Liberal and the Conservative parties after the debates. The second, a bleak federal report from Policy Horizons Canada that quietly warns us about where this country is heading if nothing changes. But first, let's start with the platforms. Mark Carney's Liberals, they are promising over $130 billion in new spending. That includes government-backed home building, new federal crown corporations, and expanded public broadcasting. The Liberals, they are pitching a cut to the lowest income tax bracket, but only by a single point. And they continue to rely on deficits well into the decade. This really, to be honest, is not a pivot. It's a rebrand. Same economic path, different voice. One foot still firmly planted in the Trudeau area. The Conservatives under Pierre Poilievre say that they will balance the books faster, cutting $23 billion in federal spending and slashing the lowest tax rate even further. They're pledging to build 2.3 million homes, cut red tape, and unlock federal land. They say they'll remove the carbon tax on industry and they'll impose retaliatory tariffs on the U.S. if it's necessary. But is that the right way to go? It's a platform that bets on private sector growth and decentralization of power from Ottawa back into your hands. So we've got two visions here. One that's doubling down on big government and bureaucracy, while the other is leaning on markets and the freedom. But now let's bring in the wild card. Policy Horizons Canada, they're essentially a federal government think tank, released a report this week that did not make headlines, but it definitely should have. It's warning that by 2040, in 15 years, upward mobility in Canada could become the exception, not the norm. In plain language, what that means is most Canadians will die in the same economic class that they were born into. It's a soft aristocracy, wealth locked in, opportunity shrinking, and the middle class, well, it's hollowed out. See, this isn't some fringe prediction. It's actually coming from inside the government's own walls, and it confirms what millions of Canadians already feel. The system is no longer working for them. So here's the question that we have to ask. Which platform confronts this reality head-on and which one pretends that it doesn't exist? Because this election is not just about who leads for the next 4 years. It's about whether Canada remains a place where your kids can do better than you did, or whether we're becoming a country where the deck is permanently stacked against us. As we continue to look at these different platforms, as we continue to analyze, it's very important that you and I do understand and we look at what each party is proposing. We have to look at the paths that we're standing on because, to be honest, we are on a proverbial continental divide as a nation. As we continue to move towards Election Day, you have to understand and look at which policies and which party is going to move us towards a Canada that has a bright future versus a Canada that, as of today's report, says has a pretty bleak future. It's a question you have to ask, do you want your kids to be able to get ahead based on their hard work, the ingenuity that they possess, their merit, meaning that they can create wealth for them and their families? Or do you want to be in a country where the harder you work does not get you ahead, does not provide you the opportunities that you want? Because when we look at the spending that the Liberals have proposed through their costed platform, remember, I'm not just giving you some random thoughts here. I'm analyzing what's been presented before us, is that there's no change in spending. There's no change in the sense of the direction or the policy or even the mentality that we've seen from over the last 10 years. Looks slightly different because of a new leader, but the numbers don't lie with the projections. The question is, as well, with the Conservatives, they've got a slightly different tone. They do want to get power back into your hands. They do want to cut spending. They do want to shrink the deficit. But I was hoping to see a bit more of a visionary approach as to what areas in our country can we expect growth. I would love to see a vision of what Canada can be, not just of slogans, but here's a plan that's going to make Canada the most attractive place to live in the world. Here's a plan that's going to make our tech sector and our energy sectors absolutely grow and thrive. Here's what we're going to do. That is what I believe Canadians are hoping and wanting. So I'm going to ask you, you need to analyze and look at each party as we move towards April 28th with the election just around the corner. We've already had advanced polls close this past weekend with record turnouts of over 7 million people came out to vote, which is fantastic. But I hope that the rest of us continue to exercise our voice on Election Day on April 28th so that you can choose which government or which party you want to form government to lead us into the future that we want as Canadians. We're going to be back right away with the good friend, with Rupa Subramanya, talking a bit more in depth about this, so stick with us. We'll be back after the break. Well, welcome back to Merit TV Canada's election coverage. We are continuing to go through everything that you need to know for this upcoming election as we just closed advanced polling this past weekend. Election Day is coming up on April 28th. I'm also joined by a friend of mine, Rupa Subramanya. Thank you for joining me again today. How are you?
I'm doing well, David. It's great to be back again.
Good. Yes, always good to have you. Would love to we're going to get into a couple things today about some of the platforms the Liberals and Conservatives they've put forth. The Conservatives actually came out today with their COSSA platforms, the Liberals over the weekend, since the English debate. I was just wondering, any general comments, any general thoughts that came from it? What was going through your mind?
Yes, so the English debate, I watched it, unlike the French debate, which coincided with an event that I was doing at the same time. I found the English debate to be extremely interesting. It was exciting. I think both Carney and Poilievre did really well, but I would give Poilievre the advantage here. He was basically on home turf, on issues that he's been talking about for the last 2 years. So I would have actually been extremely surprised if he had performed poorly, because he should know this. He should be able to say this in his sleep, essentially. So, so he did extremely well. I think his attacks on Carney on the pipelines and the Liberals' record for the last 10 years, those attacks were very sharp and pointed. And I'm not, I know Carney supporters and some people who are nonpartisan will say, well, I think Carney actually did well. I would disagree. I found, as I put it on X, I said Carney reminds me of my econometrics professor in grad school. He just puts you to sleep, and I'm not very, I don't find him extremely exciting. He's very wooden. He comes across as extremely wooden and academic, whereas Poilievre is, more to my, as the kind of attack dog he is. He has been. He's a career politician, and he knows how to, attack his opponents. But having said that, did it make a difference to the voter? There was a snap poll that happened, I think, with Abacus.
That's right.
They conducted a snap poll. It didn't really move the dial much at all. So I think in the end, all of this was just essentially bread and circuses, as it always has been, in my opinion.
Yeah, I felt more of the same as you. I felt they both played to their strengths, to their base. Carney didn't do any major blunders, which is a success. And Poilievre, I noticed Jagmeet Singh, I thought, was trying to goat Poilievre a couple times, and he just kind of remained calm and cool through that. So I think they stuck to their guns with what they've been saying up to the debate. So for me, it didn't really move anything either way. I was hoping for some fireworks. I was hoping for something that we could at least learn that's a new piece of information regarding what they're going to do. But they kind of just towed the line as to what they had been doing. So I would be interested in the future of changing up our debate styles. I don't know how that looks like, but I'd love to see a bit more, what's to say, throw a wrench in to see how the guys handle certain situations.
I'd like to see gladiator-style debate. Honestly, I'd pay to see that. But I don't think I'm going to get my wish anytime soon.
Well, Rupa, maybe we figure out a way that you host the next debates for next elections and you hold them to an answer and say, that's not answering the question, sir. And we actually learn some more as a Canadian electorate.
Actually, that's a great point, David. Steve Paikin is a great journalist, but I didn't see much in the way of any interventions by him. That's an excellent point, actually. Whereas I think with American presidential debates, you do see that quite a bit. You do see that tension between the moderator and the candidates. So I don't know. Maybe it's because we're too polite, but I think that's got to change. But you make an excellent point.
Yeah. Well, one can only hope. Maybe we can move the needle a little bit. We'll start working on that. I want to change our direction to the platforms that have been released over the weekend from the Liberals and the Conservatives. This is the costed platform. We touched on this very briefly, you and I, last week, but this is essentially, just so you all know, this is a breakdown of spending, of where they're going to be allocating dollars. It just gives us a little bit more of an understanding to strengthen out their plan. The Liberals came out on the weekend. Conservatives came out just today, this morning, with theirs being Tuesday. Any just first thoughts? Just want to touch on it from 10,000 feet, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, a couple of quick points there. So the Conservatives actually released their costed platform after the advanced polling had ended. So I found that a little peculiar. I'm not quite sure I understand the strategy behind that. Bear in mind, about 7.3 million Canadians have voted already at this past weekend in advanced polling.
Wow.
So why did they wait, which is a record, by the way. It's up 25% since 2021. So why did they wait till today to release the costed platform? I'm not sure. But having said that, just briefly, Mark Carney, I think, is proposing $130 billion in new spending over the next 4 years, and projecting a $62.3 billion deficit for 2025, 2026. Sorry, I'm just reading this off their platform, their respective platforms. And the Conservatives plan to reduce the federal deficit by 70%, projecting a $31.4 billion deficit for the same time period. They're going to do cuts to the bureaucracy, cuts to foreign aid, and so on. But, having said that, I think I'm the average Canadian to a large extent, and I'm looking at these numbers. And to me, it's just a bunch of numbers, right? I don't know what $70 billion means. I don't know if that's the right number. I don't know if that's a good number. I don't have the technical capacity to assess this. I'm not an accountant, and I'm not a budget officer. I've never held those positions. I don't have training in that. So what is the point of these costed platforms? And it reminds me of a point that I made the last time I was on your show, where what is the point of these platforms anyway, costed or not? And I think in the end, I suppose for undecided voters, they might be, if they're concerned about things like deficits and taxes and public spending, they might look at this as a test for, economic responsibility. And then, of course, political pundits and policy wonks also, get excited when they see a costed platform. But in the end, these platforms are so incredibly technical. They're full of assumptions. We don't know how they arrived at these numbers. And I think in the end, for the average Canadian, they're going to vote based on how on vibes. It goes back to vibes essentially, and not some complex spreadsheet filled with numbers. Perception obviously is everything, and for voters, if they're going to remember the candidate who made them feel heard on the issues that they care about, whether it's housing, cost of living, and so on.
Yeah, that's a fair point. This is one of the first costed platforms that I've actually thumbed through and gone through both of them in detail. In the past, I haven't really paid a lot of attention to them. I think most Canadians probably don't. Like you said, they're numbers. For me, I try to look at it from a 10,000-foot view. Is what direction is it showing that the parties are wanting to go? And I think this provides a little bit of insight as to are the Liberals, are they going to be more of the same from what Trudeau was? Or is Carney actually going to be putting money where his mouth is, so to speak, with differing from Justin Trudeau, as he said, focusing on the economy and building out the economic challenges that we do face? So I did notice a little bit of difference, I think, between the Conservatives and what they're stating and the Liberals and what they're stating. You said it in terms of deficit spending, trying to reduce it, being a little more apprehensive with where spending goes from the Conservatives versus the Liberals. But for me, it always comes down to it is just words and numbers on a paper until we can actually see some action. And I think personally for me, there's some skeptics. I'm skeptical as to what will actually be done. But for me, I do think it's worth it to, at least for citizens, to encourage you to try it. If you haven't had a habit, just take a look and kind of get an idea of, does this align? Is it more of maybe what we've seen with Liberal spending over the last 4 or 5 years or 10 years? And can an answer that Pierre's going to have to give is, how do they actually plan on doing this? Like, it's great to say, we're going to do this. I'd like to see how. I would love to see a more of a robust plan for Canadians. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, that's more than fair, and I share your view on that as well. I would say the Conservative costed platform is very similar to the Harper era platform. Carney's is more or less in line with the Trudeau era costed platforms. So I think in that sense there are similarities with the previous political dispensation from the same party. But one thing, I mean, I haven't, again, I haven't quite fully read through all of it line by line, but one thing that jumped out at me that both cost platforms have in common is that I don't think anyone is really talking about growth. It's all about cutting spending. Yep. It's doing this and cutting foreign aid, and and I do appreciate those of us who've been calling Pierre Poilievre to say more on the woke stuff, DEI and that sort of thing. I'm glad that that actually made it into this costed platform, that federal funding will not be given to institutions that don't practice freedom of speech and so on. So that it's good to see that, but in the end, there's nothing super exciting for me. No one's promising like 5%, 6% growth.
Yes.
Not that is even realistic necessarily for a Western advanced industrial nation, but still, the point is, I'm just not seeing anything that is jumping at me that says, oh, we're going to be like one of the fastest growing economies out there in the next few years.
I think that's a fantastic point, and I wish more Canadians would be thinking towards this, and it will continue to help you guys I'm glad you brought that up, because if you look at Canada and you look at simply what the fundamentals are of Canada, the raw resources we have, also the ingenuity that Canadians have shown in the past with what has been started here and has often been moved to other countries, there is so much potential for Canada to be a world leader. Of course, we're part of the G7, but to be an actual world leader, not just because we're a part of the G7, but because we are pushing the envelope in energy and technology. You look at all these different areas of how to live, also being one of the best places to live in the world. We have fallen in a lot of areas over the last while, and I would love to see more of a visionary approach come back to, this is what we can be, here's where we can go, here's what amazing Canada looks like for all people who want to call it home. I'd love to see a bit more of that, and what you're saying kind of leads to the idea of a managerialism, in the sense of we're just going to manage what we have and try to make little tweaks here and there, which doesn't move the needle. But yeah, that's a fantastic point, because I think that would ignite a lot of Canadians. Well, here's what we can be because of A, B, and C.
Mm-hmm. No, I share that. Keep in mind that we've had something called the lost decade for 10 years. Per capita GDP has essentially remained stagnant at something like 0.5%. It's one of the lowest among, probably the lowest among G7 countries and among the lowest in the world. And that's, I suppose, as far as Carney and Poilievre are concerned, they're just trying to stem the bleeding, I think, at this point. Maybe there isn't much room to maneuver. There isn't much that they can do. They just have to kind of like just get the economy going and make fixes at the margin. Perhaps, I mean, to be fair to both of them, maybe they're not in a position to come out with something big. Given the state of the economy, 10 years of basically no growth, very, very, we have a productivity crisis, which is just gotten even more serious over the last 10 years. And of course, all of these other issues that Pierre Poilievre has been hammering away at, such as housing and the affordability crisis. So there's a lot that needs to be done. And so perhaps that's what they're keeping in mind before being overly ambitious. And that's just my conjecture.
Yep, then that's a fair take as well. Well, we are running out of time here, Rupa, but we didn't even get a chance to get to the Policy Horizons Canada report that was released today. It's basically, the short of it is, it's an economic and socioeconomic lookout over the next 15 years. They advise directly the government, kind of like an in-house think tank. It was not a great report. I'm sure you can go on X or check the news as to what they were saying. Basically, one of the things that stood out to me on there was projecting the next 15 years that we will not be able to, again, this is just their projections based on where we've been, having trouble to move our socioeconomic levels based on merit and hard work, which really is a fundamental in terms of wanting for your family to get ahead and have a place to thrive. So that was something. I will let you comment if you want. We got about 30 seconds. Any thoughts on that came out today?
Yeah. So they're looking at 2040.
That's right.
But these projected challenges are already here in 2025. We're already going through all of these things. There's one interesting thing that caught my eye in the Conservative Party's costed platform, where they talk about how you don't need a post-secondary education to get into the civil service. That's exactly what what this report that you mentioned is saying. They're saying that increasingly young people are not going to pursue post-secondary education. They're only going to probably do that just to as a signaling a feature of telling people that they're part of the elite, but it's basically going to be useless. And that's exactly what happened with the Conservative Party platform, at least on that one point. So we're already here. 2040 is already here in 2025. So I don't know what the big deal about this report is, because we're already living it. Yeah.
Hey, good take. Well, we're out of time, Rupa. Thank you for joining me again. We'll be back right after this break. Well, welcome back to Merit TV Canada's Election Watch. There's lots to consider. After some of the facts and some of the opinions that we brought for you today, there's a lot to consider and to take in about what Canada is or what Canada could be. Just recapping some of the information that you need to know is that when you look at the Liberals under Mark Carney, see, they're offering Canadians over $130 billion in new spending. So that seems to be a continued deficit that stretch out to the end of the decade. Whereas Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, they are going to be trying to slash the deficit by dropping it. It's not a perfect plan. I'd like to see more from the Conservatives, but it is aggressive and it's definitely ambitious. The question becomes, can they pull that off? If the economy is very important to you, it's worth to know, where are they going to be spending? Mark Carney is talking about bringing in more spending for the military, investing in the Arctic and northern military bases. That's important to know as well. Mark Carney has said he wants to be an energy superpower here in Canada, but at the same time, he wants to hit net zero targets. Information like that is valuable to know, because the question becomes how. Canada is at a continental divide. As I mentioned earlier, we are going to have to decide what direction that we want to go. That's why this election is crucial. I know we hear that all the time from Americans and all around the world. This is the most important. And I'm not going to state those words, but I am going to re-emphasize how important it is for you as a citizen to go and to honor your title by voting, by knowing who you're voting for and what they stand for. What kind of future do you want for Canada? depending on what kind of future you want, you need to vote accordingly. So thank you so much for sticking with us. I'm going to encourage you to make sure you're available on the 28th to go vote. Also, stick with us here at Merit TV Canada as we have full-blown election coverage on Election Day, bringing you the most recent results. So be standing by and watching for that. We will see you next time. Thanks for watching.